Pipeline destruction incident. Ukrainian Special Operations Forces have allegedly conducted a destructive attack on the newly rebuilt Druzhba pipeline system that carries Russian oil to Hungary and several other Eastern European countries. This critical energy infrastructure had only recently been restored after previous damage during the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The operation reportedly occurred under direct orders from President Volodymyr Zelensky's administration as a strategic move to disrupt Russian energy revenues and demonstrate Ukraine's capability to strike at valuable targets. The attack has resulted in the immediate cessations of oil flows to Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, with energy analysts estimating that approximately 50% of Europe's eastern oil supply has been interrupted. The damaged section of the pipeline lies within Ukrainian territory, giving Kyiv jurisdictional authority over the infrastructure but creating profound diplomatic repercussions across the continent. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has expressed outrage at the energy infrastructure attack, though her comments initially focused on previous Russian strikes against Ukrainian civilian targets. In a statement that now seems prescient given the pipeline incident, von der Leyen noted that the Kremlin will stop at nothing to terrorize Ukraine, blindly killing civilians while emphasizing the EU's commitment to respond with further sanctions. The Commission President characterized the pipeline destruction as a grim reminder of what's at stake in the conflict, though she stopped short of directly assigning blame for the energy infrastructure attack until further investigation can be completed. The European Union delegation had recently been threatened by missile strikes in Kyiv that landed dangerously close to diplomatic facilities, killing civilians and damaging nearly 100 buildings in the worst attack on the Ukrainian capital since July. European energy crisis. The immediate effect of the pipeline destruction has been a sharp spike in global oil price, with Brent crude futures climbing near 8% in early trading following the interruptions of supplies. The European energy market faced particular strain as the incident compounded existing shortage caused by previous sanctions on Russian energy export. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has declared a state of energy emergency, implementing immediate rationing measures for fuel distribution while emergency reserves are activated. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico similarly announced contingency plans focusing on industrial energy conservation, though both leaders face political backlash over their country's continued dependence on Russian energy source despite the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Natural gas prices have also experienced significant volatility despite the attack targeting oil infrastructure, as traders anticipate potential retaliatory measures that might affect other energy sectors. The interconnected nature of European energy markets means that disruption in one sector inevitably affects others, particularly as winter approaches and energy demands increase. German Economic Minister Robert Habeck has warned of challenging months ahead for European energy security, while French President Emmanuel Macron has called an emergency meeting of EU energy ministers to coordinate response measures. The European Central Bank faces additional pressure regarding inflation concerns as energy costs constitute a substantial component of consumer price index across the continent. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has delivered his strongest statement to date regarding the pipeline incident, calling it an act of economic terrorism against sovereign NATO member states. Orbán has consistently blocked European Union efforts to fast-track Ukrainian membership, citing concerns about corruption, democratic deficiencies, and now what he characterized as reckless behavior that endangers European energy security. The Hungarian leaders has drawn particular attention to what he described as Ukraine's pattern of unpredictable actions that damage European interests, suggesting that such behavior demonstrates the country's unpreparedness for EU membership. Orbán's statement notably emphasized that this is why we keep vetoing Ukrainian accession. They cannot be trusted and they sabotage economies, marking a significant escalation in diplomatic rhetoric. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has echoed Orbán's sentiment, stating unequivocally that Ukraine cannot be trusted while calling for leadership changes in Kyiv. Fico's comments represent a notably hardening of position from a leader who had previously maintained more moderate stance on Ukrainian support. Zelensky needs to go, Fico declared during a press conference in Bratislava, arguing that the Ukrainian president had crossed a red line by targeting energy infrastructure that serves European allies. This dramatic shift suggests potential fractures in the previously unified European front pointing Ukraine against Russian aggression, particularly among Eastern member states that remains dependent on Russian energy transit through Ukrainian territory. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky have characterized the pipeline incident as a big mistake during a joint press conference addressing the crisis. Both leaders have stopped short of acknowledging Ukrainian responsibility for the attack, instead emphasizing the complex circumstances of warfare and suggesting that details remain unclear. Von der Leyen has stressed the importance of maintaining European solidarity while acknowledging the understandable anger of affected nations. Zelensky has deflected criticism by highlighting Ukraine's existential struggle against Russian aggression, arguing that desperate times sometimes require desperate measure when confronting a powerful adversary that shows no hesitations in targeting civilian infrastructure. The most extraordinary development in the crisis has been Hungary's explicit invocations of NATO's Article 5 Collective Defense Clause as a potential response to the pipeline attack. While no formal request for Article 5 activation has been submitted to the North Atlantic Council, Orbán's public consideration of this option represents unprecedented diplomatic territory for the alliance. Article 5 states that an attack on one member shall be considered an attack on all, but its application to economic infrastructure damaged by a non-member country would establish entirely new precedent for NATO collective security mechanism. The threat alone has sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles and creates significant concern among alliance members about potential fragmentation of NATO unity. Legal experts with NATO are reportedly divided on whether the pipeline destruction would meet the threshold for Article 5 invocation, particularly since the infrastructure damage was primarily serving Russian oil exports rather than Hungarian domestic consumption. Some analysts argue that Hungary's energy security concerns might constitute a legitimate national security threat under NATO's expansive understanding of defense, while others contend that using Article 5 in response to economic damage would represent a dangerous expansion of the clause's intended purpose. The United States has traditionally been cautious about Article 5 invocations outside of clear military attack, and the Trump administration's response to such a request would likely determine its ultimate viability within the alliance. Russian officials have seized upon the diplomatic fallout, with Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov stating that Russia remains interested in a negotiated end to the conflict despite the ongoing fighting. This familiar rhetoric contrasts with Moscow's continued missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian population centers, including the recent strike that killed civilians in Kyiv. Peskov's comment appeared designed to position Russia as a reasonable actor compared to what he characterized as Ukrainian recklessness. The Western intelligence agency continues to report substantial Russian offensive operations along multiple fronts of the conflict. The pipeline incident has provided Moscow with unexpected propaganda opportunities by highlighting divisions within the NATO alliance and creating friction between Ukraine and its European supporters. The European response to the pipeline crisis has revealed significant fracture within the EU and NATO regarding continued support for Ukraine. Eastern member states, including Hungary, Slovakia, and to a lesser extent Croatia and Bulgaria, have expressed outrage at the energy disruption and called for immediate reassessment of military and economic assistance to Kyiv. By contrast, Western European powers like Germany, France, and the Benelux countries have urged restraint and continued solidarity, emphasizing the need to avoid divisive actions that might benefit Russia strategically. Poland represents a particular interesting case, simultaneously condemning the pipeline attack while maintaining strong support for Ukraine's military efforts against Russian forces. The United States under the Trump administration has maintained a notably cautious stance regarding the pipeline incident, with White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stating that President Trump was not happy about this news, but he was also not surprised. This relatively muted response reflects the administration's consistent position that both Russia and Ukraine should pursue negotiated settlement rather than military escalation. Trump has repeatedly expressed his desire to broker a face-to-face meeting between President Putin and Zelensky, though these efforts have thus far proven unsuccessful. The pipeline attack represents a complication for American diplomacy by introducing new tensions between Ukraine and European allies whose support remains crucial for effective peace negotiation. Trade implications have further complicated the diplomatic landscape, particularly given the Trump administration's aggressive use of tariffs as a foreign policy tools. Senior White House trade advisor Peter Navarro has recently criticized India's continued purchase of Russian oil, dubbing the Ukraine conflict Modi's war in a notable escalation of rhetoric. This approach to energy diplomacy suggests possible sympathy with the Hungarian position, as the administration has consistently emphasized national economic interests over multilateral solidarity. The pipeline incident may therefore strengthen Orbán's position within NATO circles by aligning with the Trump administration's transactional approach to international relations and defense commitment. The destruction of the Druzhba pipeline has triggered urgent reassessment of European energy security architecture, particularly regarding the vulnerability of transit infrastructure. Germany has accelerated plans to expand liquefied natural gas import capacity at North Sea terminals, while Poland has fast-tracked interconnection projects with Scandinavian energy markets. The European Commission is reportedly developing emergency legislation that would mandate minimum energy storage requirement and fund alternative supply routes for Eastern member states most dependent on Russian source. These measures represent a strategic pivot toward energy independence that acknowledge the persistent vulnerability created by reliance on Russian resources transiting through conflict zone. The incident has also renewed debate about the sustainability of current sanctions regime against Russia, particularly as European economies face potential recession triggered by energy price shock. Some diplomatic voices, particularly from Southern European states less affected by the pipeline disruption, have suggested reconsidering the complete embargo on Russian energy imports in favor of more targeted sanctions that would allow controlled purchase under price cap. This position has been vigorously opposed by Baltic states and Poland, who argued that any relaxation of energy sanctions would simply fund further Russian aggression. The pipeline attack has thus exposed fundamental tension between immediate economic interests and longer-term security considerations within European policy circles. Russian response option remains constrained by the country's dependence on energy revenues despite diversification efforts. Finance Ministry data indicates that oil and gas exports still constitute approximately 45% of federal budget revenues, creating significant pressure to maintain export flows despite political tensions. Some analysts suggest Moscow might redirect additional volumes through the Northern Sea route or expand pipeline capacity to China, though both options would require substantial time and investment to implement at scale. In the immediate term, Russian energy companies are likely to increase rail and maritime shipments where possible, though these transportation methods incur significantly higher costs and lower profit margin compared to pipeline export. The pipeline incident has most likely terminated Ukraine's prospect for European Union membership in the near term, as Hungarian opposition now appears insurmountable and other previously sympathetic members have expressed renewed reservation. EU enlargement requires unanimous support from all member states, giving Hungary effective veto powers over Ukrainian accession, regardless of other countries' position. This development represents a significant strategic setback for Kyiv, which has identified European integration as a primary national objective since the 2014 Revolution of Dignity. The Zelensky government now faces the prospect of prolonged diplomatic isolation unless it can repair a relationship with skeptical Eastern member states. The European Commission faces institutional challenges regarding its credibility as an honest broker in conflict resolution, particularly given its strong rhetorical support for Ukraine throughout the hostility with Russia. Some diplomatic analysts suggest that the Commission's increasingly overt alignment with Western European positions has compromised its ability to mediate between Kyiv and dissenting Eastern members. This perception problems extend to the broader European project itself, which increasingly appears divided along east-west lines regarding fundamental questions of security, energy, and relations with Russia. The pipeline crisis has thus exacerbated existing tensions within the EU structure that threaten to undermine collective decisions making on multiple policy fronts. Ukrainian officials have reportedly expressed surprise at the intensity of European reaction to the pipeline attack, suggesting that they underestimated the economic and diplomatic consequences of targeting energy infrastructure. This miscalculation reflects the challenging position of a country fighting for survival while simultaneously attempting to maintain international support networks. The Zelensky administration now must balance military necessity against diplomatic practicality, particularly as Western assistance face increasing political headwinds in multiple donor countries. The pipeline incident may prompt strategic reassessment within Ukrainian security structures regarding the targeting of economic assets with potential collateral damage for allied nations. The United States response to the pipeline crisis has been characteristically pragmatic under the Trump administration, with emphasis on brokering negotiations rather than assigning blames. President Trump has consistently expressed his desire for a negotiated settlement to the conflict and has been urging both Putin and Zelensky to meet face-to-face. His plan involved first bringing the two leaders together, followed by a three-way meeting where Trump would participate in direct talks. This approach now faces additional complications due to the pipeline incident, which has introduced new tensions between Ukraine and European allies whose support remains crucial for any sustainable peace agreement. China has maintained its characteristically cautious stance regarding the pipeline incident, avoiding explicit condemnation while expressing general concern about energy security and regional stability. Chinese state media coverage has emphasized the negative consequence for European consumers while subtly criticizing American leadership failures in preventing the escalation. Beijing's position reflects careful calculation between supporting Russia strategically while avoiding action that might further damage China's already tense relation with European trading partners. The pipeline incident ultimately benefited Chinese interests by diverting Western attention from the Pacific theater and creating division within the Nato alliance that complicate coordinated response to Chinese activities in the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait. Russia's strategic position has been strengthened by the pipeline incident despite the temporary loss of export revenue, as the attack has successfully created friction between Ukraine's and its European supporters. Kremlin officials have subtly encouraged Hungarian retaliation against Ukraine while positioning Russia as a reliable energy partner despite the ongoing conflict. This diplomatic strategy aims to capitalize on European energy shortage to weaken sanctions enforcement and divide NATO unity regarding continued military assistance to Ukraine. The pipeline destruction has thus provided Moscow with unexpected leverage in its psychological campaign to erode Western resolve and isolate Ukraine diplomatically despite military setback on the battlefield. The consequences of the pipeline attack will likely reverberate long after the immediate damage is repaired, particularly regarding European energy security architecture and NATO cohesion. The incident has exposed critical vulnerabilities in continental energy supplies while demonstrating the potential for conflict spillover effects affecting neutral parties. Future historical analysis may identify this event as a turning point in European security policy, prompting fundamental reassessment of energy independence, infrastructure protection, and alliance solidarity in an increasingly contested geopolitical environment. For now, the immediate crisis continues to evolve as diplomatic communications intensify and energy markets remain volatile amid uncertainty about future developments. That's all for me for today. If you like the video presentation and you would like to follow for more, hit that subscribe and like button now, and we will continue to build this show for you. Thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. I will see you soon. Bye for now.